Lovely. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this last installment of this academic year's Buddhist Chaplaincy speaker series. And I'm so excited to invite a friend and a former colleague, Annanda Barclay, who I met when I was doing my residency at Stanford, and Annanda was doing her fellowship there and also working as a chaplain for the students at Stanford University. So I've always wanted to hear more about the kind of work that she does there. Um, Otherwise, the Reverend Annanda Barclay currently serves as the associate pastor at the Sunnyvale Presbyterian Church. She has completed an advanced spiritual care research fellowship at Auburn Seminary and then also at Stanford University. And there she focused on moral injury and spiritual care. Annanda is the co-creator and host of the award-winning AMBI nominated podcast Moral Repair, a Black exploration of tech, produced in collaboration with PRX Productions and the John Templeton Foundation. Annanda is also a death doula, trained through the renowned Going with Grace program. And she is also in the process of and has been expanding her practice through the UC Berkeley psychedelic facilitation program, integrating psychedelic care into her holistic approach to spiritual support. So I think you can all see my challenge there when I approached Ananda to try and identify one topic for her to talk about today. And Ananda, I think you're going to need to come back and talk to us some more in a little while. But today, we're excited to hear about the value of chaplaincy in education. So thank you, Ananda, for joining us here today. And I pass it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vanessa, for having me. I'm excited to be here, and thank you all for taking time out of your Saturday morning to be here, to be in community and conversation with one another. One of the things that really drew me to higher education chaplaincy was after the pandemic. I realized the important. I was at Stanford during the pandemic, and realized how important spiritual care was in that acute time of crisis. I mean, it seems very obvious, but to hold people tenderly at a time when this was, pre-vaccine and we didn't know what was going on and high death rates, I saw very acutely the need for spiritual care and realized that this is a need that should go beyond just, hospital systems, right? Hospices, and jails and prisons. I think this is something that can be very, very accessible in other areas. And an area of deep concern for me is higher education. And not just like general higher education. I wish I could say that like that was the case for me, but it was very specifically having to do with technological advancement and being at Stanford, the students there, and what they might be asked to do in light of AI, right, and moral injury. And so when I think about higher education chaplaincy, there are some pretty significant differences than clinical chaplaincy. One, it's a non-clinical environment, which I think has its perks in some ways in terms of your ability to have long-term relationships with students, with faculty, with staff and administration. In other ways, because it's non-clinical, it could be a little bit more difficult to get right to the spiritual ailments that people are having because they're going about their everyday lives. And so, one of the things that I find really, how to put this, not helpful, but important is relationship building. So, in higher education chaplaincy, um, especially in a place like Stanford, that's not necessarily known to be like as open with religion or spirituality per se. A huge part is getting yourself ingrained into the culture of that particular institution. So that means like showing up at student events and not obviously not centering yourself in those events, right? Showing up in student events, getting to know students, getting to know the different dormitories for both undergraduate and graduate students. A huge partner of mine was the dean, the GLOW office, which is the graduate life office, and getting to know the dean of graduate students and studies. These these touch points are very, very important because we're not in a clinical environment in higher education settings. So people have to get to know you. And there are some similarities in a clinical setting, right? A huge similarity is that you still have to teach people what chaplaincy is. So you still have to let them know that you're not here to proselytize. You're not here to share. I mean, I'm coming out of a Christian tradition, right? So bless us all, but to like share the good news, right? Or anything like that. But you're coming to accompany people in their journey. And given the age demographic in higher education, what you're really doing is for undergraduate students, you're helping them with late stage adolescence into adulthood. So a lot of them, this is the first time that they're experiencing faith, their belief systems, their values outside of being at home with their parents. And they're beginning to have some dissonance and um, some friction with what they were always taught to believe, and now they're encountering the world on their own and what's coming up for them. And a lot of my encounters with students who are undergraduates, as it related to their family system, was, oh, my family, I was always taught this, but now that I'm going through life as an adult, I see things differently. And will my family still love me if I believe something different? And this was across race, this is across gender, this is across class and sexuality. Will my family still love me? Um, if I do believe that LGBTQ people like have the right to exist and thrive, if I want to explore my sexuality, y'all, I got a lot of Catholic students that would come to me instead of the priests for that, right? And so you're really helping out folks that who's to be honest, whose brains aren't fully still yet developed, and so also decision making, and so helping them make decisions that will lead to harm reduction. And what I mean by harm reduction isn't simply, um, like saying, no, you shouldn't take those drugs, although sometimes, like, we probably don't want our students to take drugs, right? But harm reduction is giving the students the appropriate tools to pursue their self determination in ways that reduce the harms that they might experience in that pursuit. Does that make sense? And so that's also a huge part of chaplaincy. Additionally, in higher education, when I look at graduate students, for the most part, but not quite, because Stanford, I don't think is unique, but you have a lot of graduate students who aren't yet like 27 years old. So their brains are still developing. It's like interesting because a lot of their worldview is all education, y'all. It's all education. Like most of them have yet to have a job outside. Like maybe they've had an internship, but it was still in the context of education. And so, um, older graduate students, I feel like those encounters were very similar with what I encountered in the hospital or something like that, again, having to do with brain development, right? Like they're able to make certain decisions, interact that way. But I was very surprised in higher education how I actually had to go back to like to youth. But it makes sense saying it, but it was very surprising. And for graduate students, a lot of them, it was dealing with stress management. Some of them had children. The older side had children or had spouses. Some of them were in the military. So I was dealing with stress management. For those who were in the military, it was often they came to see the chaplain because if they saw the psychologist, they were afraid that it might disqualify them or get them kicked out if they showed signs of depression or anxiety, depending upon which branch of the military they were in. And so they're trying to for some of them, they actually probably could have used a psych referral, to be honest, but it is making sure holistically. I had one student who was in the Air Force, and uh, they were working on space engineering. And they had experienced both, I would argue, PTSD and moral injury from training in the academy, and had lost both um, an uncle and a cousin that they were close to in a tragic helicopter accident. And part of what their training was in the Air Force Academy was to recover a helicopter crash in the middle of the ocean where which is kind of reenacting the exact death of their loved ones, because that helicopter crash took place in an ocean. And so this is a situation where clearly it would be great to have a multidisciplinary team for that particular student of psych and a spiritual care. But in this particular case, this was not possible, right? So it's how to use the best skills and tools that you have to bolster without undermining um, the student's ability to remain in the military, earn their income, and pursue their career, right? So it could also get very, very sticky. Another thing I'll say about being in higher education chaplaincy is it is unique from clinical chaplaincy, and that I was, for the first year, I was the only clinician on the team. And what I mean by that, I was the only chaplain that had clinical training. All of the other chaplains called chaplains, but also did not have clinical training. And so when we get outside of the hospital and the hospice environment, um, chaplain doesn't necessarily always mean the same education or training background, right? And so I also want that to be made known, not to say, I mean, I do have a bias towards clinical training. I'll admit it, but I don't think it's necessarily better than the other in the sense that the other chaplains all had PhDs, so they knew how to navigate the academy, which is incredibly important for students, right? In ways that I did not. So when it came to acute things as it related to student credit hours, when it related to students um, trying to finish their dissertations or PhDs, or trying to finish their thesis, their undergraduate thesis, those chaplains were excellent at being able to teach them how to navigate that space. Yes, thank you, Augusta. Clinical training does equal CPE. Yes. And so I was learning from the non-clinically trained chaplains, and the non-clinically trained chaplains were learning from me. And yes, there were frustrations at times because I was seeing some dynamics that just drove me nuts, but that's just a part of it, right? And I'm sure they were frustrated with me of like, why are you so clinical? Which came as a surprise because I typically did not find myself to be as clinical until I got into the higher education space. Another thing that I will say as it relates to higher education chaplaincy that is really, really important to note, believe it or not, you have more relational freedom in higher education chaplaincy, meaning you will get to know most of your students over time. The more you show up on campus activities, the more connections you make, the more you garner trust, the more people understand what it is that you do and realize that you're actually providing value and service. I hate to talk about it in capitalist terms, but let's be honest. You're they understand that you're providing a value and service that other admins um, aren't their job descriptions aren't supposed to hold. And so by the end of my first year, I found a great partner in El Centro, which is the Latine um, student uh, like designated house on campus for that community. And they understood chaplaincy right away. And so they're like, oh, we would love this. Like, please host. So I created some clinical hours where students could have one-on-one 30-minute sessions. I called it Talk with a Chaplain. It evolved to Chat with a Chaplain. And that was really wonderful because it enabled students, one, to experience like, what is this chaplaincy, this curiosity, where that particular location was on campus, very important for higher education. It was right in the main quad. So it was right across from the bookstore, it was right across from like where most of like the restaurants are, in a central place in campus. So everybody's coming. The Latine El Centro was like, anybody's welcome in our space to use this service. So it wasn't exclusively for Latine folks. So they were already open to having it be a value for the community that they were more than willing to house. And what it did is it provided relief for the admin in that particular affinity group, because students are students and they're going to come to the folks that they're most comfortable with in their community to talk about what's going on in their lives. And you all know that like admins, they can hear a little bit, but they actually don't have time to hear all the woes of the students and like the dramas in their lives, some of which, range from, loss of a loved one to like unsure what's going to happen after graduation, also to like, the I use petty playfully, but like the petty stuff of like, do you know what this girl said about this and that? Like, it's the whole range, right? Of like friend dramas, right? And so once El Centro, like they got it and they said, yes, set this up. Because what it does is the value that I found that higher education chaplaincy provides is it allows the admins, it allows everybody else to perform their job well, similarly to like in a clinical setting, and it allows the chaplains to take like some of the messy stuff, right? The messy stuff that might not necessarily go to the therapist. And at Stanford, the therapists were all students were blessed to have like I think free 10 sessions with a therapist, but also because students were so concerned about taking sessions from somebody who might need it most, the students who probably could have used the therapist didn't necessarily reach out to the therapist, right? So, and that was a huge issue all 3 years while I was at that post, and it just increased as dissent on campuses across the country increased with what has been and what started with going on with Israel and Gaza, and so students knew that particular resource for them was precious, and there was not enough. Like, I mean, Stanford has a pretty um, expansive program, I would say, but it still didn't meet the actual need, I would argue. And the students were aware of that. So they would hold back and basically say, if I know somebody who is in extreme need, I don't want to take that from them. And so chaplains, we were able to kind of cover that, which is huge, right? We're able to hold that space once people outside of El Centro and getting involved in other areas on campus, once they knew what we were about and able to do. I will say, once, no, it was like 3 times a quarter, we would partner with a multidisciplinary team on campus. Stanford has life coaches for students, so they could help them get their life coach together, which is a free access. There are therapists on campus. Again, that's free. Um, and they would also invite ourselves, like chaplains, and what we would do 3 times a quarter is do a grief support group. And what I found with that grief support group was most of the students that came, the grief and bereavement that they had was from a loss of a loved one. And I think this is really important for this particular age group because their peers might not have experienced death of a loved one yet. And so, especially for the undergraduates, but it was also very poignant for the graduate students as well. And that was, how do I talk about the loss of my parent, the loss of my sibling? Um, and it felt isolating for them because their peers just didn't know how to relate, didn't know the right things to say, didn't know. And so, not often, but it was common to see, I think, normal bereavement and slight depression with that reality, because like who could they turn to? And so we encourage not just that group, but for them to get to know each other and meet up outside of that group, so that way they can form bonds and friendships of people who can relate to that life experience, which most of those students could not. Additionally, I'll say another interesting thing about higher education chaplaincy, if we think about what I encountered a lot with students, is students who are international. Now, I'm sure this has changed drastically given what has gone on this year, but I came at the offset of the pandemic, right? And so a huge thing that international students had was, excuse me, One, will I be able to, if I go home, will I be able to come back? That happened a lot for our Middle Eastern students during my tenure. Um, and some of the Chinese students, which Stanford has a lot of. If I go home, will I be able to come back? How to explain to my family what life is like in America and some of these things that I need to do in order to finish my degree or to continue to pursue my career because it's foreign, it's a foreign concept from where they come from, right? Or will will I be able to after pursuing here, like will I be able to afford to continue on to what I hope for, right? So you had those issues that were massive. Oh, and a fourth one was, if a loved one died. That was huge. If a loved one died back in the home country and trying to get back home and trying to negotiate that. And what does that mean for, there's several international students who weren't able to make a funeral or passing or go through those rituals of grief that help us manage the grief that comes up. There are several students who missed parts of those rituals, if not all of them at times, given when the grief happened, what was going on during class, maybe some a geopolitical tension where they didn't know if they'd be able to go or come back, that kind of thing. So it was a really interesting, and I will be honest, it was a humbling learning curve. It was I didn't realize how clinical I was until I got to the education side. Um, that is in general. Here, I'm looking at my notes. But if I were to sum up what a higher education chaplain does, a higher education chaplain does nothing different than a chaplain that's gone through CPE or any other space, but it is very relational. And so it reminded me more of like parish ministry than I expected. And so I think that is a huge difference. So for those of you who are like really into community, the nurturing of community, showing up in community, and getting to know long-term relationships, higher education chaplaincy, I think is a really unique place for that. Now, I will say, it's also at this point with this particular administration, it is at risk. So even right now, the Office of Religious and Spiritual Life, there is one chaplain fellow that is still there. Um, Ken, great guy, great guy. He's a Hindu chaplain, and I know that they're cutting hours. So if we also look at how our country right now, how this current administration and the unique political situation that we're in is impacting higher education chaplaincy, it's significant. Um, so we have a lot of these programs beginning to shrink and close, which for me, it's kind of devastating because the students could very much use this. And once they get it, they get it. I had a lot of regular students. I almost felt like if I had a private practice chaplaincy in a lot of ways, this is what it would look like, right? I had a lot of regular students. And so I think when we're talking about the future of higher education chaplaincy, because right now I'm talking about a past, right? We're thinking about the future or the current present of higher education chaplaincy. I think it is incredibly important to show not simply through words and explaining what a chaplain does, but to make it very plain the value of the services that we provide, the value of students being able to go to somebody to seek spiritual, emotional care as it relates to their formation as a human being, and to differentiate that from like a campus therapist or a campus life coach, right? That those things are similar, but they are acutely different. And because you have to show that you're worth maintaining in the place of things, in the place of the academy. So I think that's actually the biggest fight, I would say, that's going on right now is like, how do we stay? And I think the biggest way to show that is to show the value. Like, what is the ROI for having chaplains on campus? Which is like kind of crude, but it's just true, right? And I feel like we chaplains do our best work when other members of the team are like, oh, I don't have to hold that. Or like, oh, I didn't know this information about this particular person that would be helpful to the overall care that we're trying to provide. Um, those kind of things that help to take certain stressors off the plates of others in the interdisciplinary team that is within our particular wheelhouse. And also, they could see the transformation of a student, which I will say in a higher education setting takes time, right? Like, there is something very satisfactory of being in a hospital or possibly even a hospice. But for sure, being in a hospital, and even though it is like harrowing situations, like you're able to dive deep really quick, right? You're able to um, kind of go through a lot of these steps of spiritual either transformation um, or kind of even acknowledging that there's an issue, right? Because the medical crisis is bringing it to the forefront, so it becomes very fresh and accessible. And so the ROI, so to speak, becomes it's very quick for the other interdisciplinary team because it has to be. In some cases, it has to do with life or death. Somebody's going into a surgery. There's a palliative situation, right? So you're able to see the results of chaplain as a part of that interdisciplinary team quite quickly. It is very different on the higher education side. It's significantly slower, right? There is no medical crisis most of the time, I should say. There is not a medical crisis. And if there is, they're sending them over to Stanford Hospital. So those chaplains are reaching it, right? But if it's not hospital worthy, so to say, um, it's slow. It's slow, which is why relationships are crucial, crucial, crucial. If I could go back and do one thing better, I would dive into, I would be the biggest networker. I networked pretty decently, but I would like 3x my networking. And I would 3x, here's what I do. And I would 3x, if this is helpful, let me talk to your center. Let me talk to your, I would have to like sell what is chaplaincy and really get in there. Um, and I think that could make a difference because now you have a broader network of people seeing the value that you're providing, right? You have a broader distribution point. Um, and lastly, I'll say for higher education, different campuses have different cultures, right? So Stanford's very relational. Like Stanford, you get into places because people know you. But when I talk to a chaplain colleague of mine, Episcopalian chaplain colleague of mine, who got his master's of divinity at Harvard, he said Harvard's very different. He goes, Harvard is just like if you're there and you like know somebody else, then you're kind of in. But so there's also like every campus, as I'm sure like you all know, even in your Buddhist center, every campus has its own culture. So the question is, what is the culture of that campus, and how do you have your chaplaincy appropriately adapt to that culture? What is the need in the campus? So I know Stanford students, high performers, usually type A personalities, very stressed. So there's this thing called the Stanford duck. That's how they describe their students, where they look fine on the surface, but below their feet are just going, 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 right? And so learning how to cater and shift um, the spiritual care that I came to provide, because I had to build that program, Talk with a Chaplain, from scratch. So I had to figure out what are the times I was testing out. Is 60 minutes a time? Is 60 minutes too long? Is 30 minutes a good time? 30 was the sweet spot. It was 45. And so I found out 30 was the sweet spot. How do I make sure I set up so where folks know how to find me, where to find me? Because originally I was at the old student union, which is where the spiritual life office is, which would make sense. And students have like every religious and spiritual student group has their own kind of office in that space. So you would think that makes sense, right? But it's kind of an obscure place to find on campus. And so if you've never met a chaplain before, you kind of don't fully know what this chaplaincy or the spiritual care visit is. And then you have to go to like the old student union on campus, right? That like you never really go up to the top floor because why? Like, it just added all these additional barriers. So El Centro was just huge because it was incredibly accessible. So it's like, how do you um, have the least amount of touch points that a student needs in order to find you? And as I got to know students and faculty, there was one faculty member I got to know, and she was really great. And her students, they had an issue with the curriculum, bless their hearts. They were all undergraduate students. I think they were either freshmen or sophomores. And I think this was the Africana or African American Studies program, and they got an intro into African American Studies. And I'm forgetting the name of the particular scholar, but this particular scholar in this particular aspect of field of African American Studies, like his work is like a stalwart work. Like you can't, you have to take it in order to get the field. But like, homie had some issues like in his personal life. It wasn't the best. And so the students were like, well, why are we learning about this person who was awful in their personal life and yet is foundational in this academic field? Like, do you not think that there's an issue here? Like, what, like thinking that the professor is signing off on this academic's personal life, and the professor's like, I'm not signing off on this, but like you do need to learn this material because it's vital to this field. And so the students were basically like protesting in class, like, Stanford doesn't care about humanity, all this kind of thing. And so the professor brought me in. She like created time in her schedule, which is wild, you all. Stanford runs on a quarter system. So you're getting, yeah, like three different, not a semester, you're getting, like quarters. And so she made time, which is wild, in her schedule for a whole class day where I come in. She did not sit in the class at all. She introduced me and she left. So that way they can kind of air their grievances and I can hold them in spiritual, like in, spiritual emotional space. It was a unique time. It was kind of wild. And it was one of those moments where I was like, oh my gosh, yes, I'm still talking with like late adolescent humans. Right. Um, and so I will say in higher education, and it worked out well. And I think they appreciated her willingness to do that. Do I think they appreciated enough? Not as much, but I also think that's that late stage adolescence, right? And so I highly recommend brushing up on just like late stage adolescence development in higher education. I really cannot stress that enough because it just like rocked me for the first like year. I was like, what is going on? Like, and I was like, oh, they're teenagers, they're late teenagers. And as we're seeing with technology, interestingly enough, it's actually increasing adolescence. So if we wonder sometimes, Gen Z, bless their hearts, like if we wonder, why, when I was in my early 20s, let's see, I'm a millennial, but when I was in my early 20s, I was working two jobs. Like there were just certain things you just had to do. And that might not necessarily be the case with these younger generations because technology is shifting development. It's impacting development. Also relationality, and then I'll pause for questions. Another very fascinating thing that I saw, um, which a phenomenon which was across the board, but it impacted chaplaincy in a very particular way, was the pandemic. So the loss that those students had of socialization during those years was significant, and it also impacted their ability to communicate in person well, right? So we had students that, like, when it comes to conflict, it just kind of went from 0 to 60, as opposed to knowing how to sit in tension with another person, um, or how to communicate disappointment or dissatisfaction outside of texts or emails or like social media comments. So it's kind of a new world in that way. Like chaplaincy has yet to address that, which is why I'm really interested in moral injury as it relates to STEM and tech in particular, because I think just tech, we're just going through the fastest, most dense um, revolution in the history of humanity right now, technologically. Like it's just significantly faster, as we could see in the past, what, 3 years since the chat GPT went public. um So, and that is impacting how we move through and behave in the world, and it's impacting these students. So, long story short, I guess, is spiritual care in higher education worth it? Yes. And also, is it will it be available in the future? I don't know, because of what's going on in this administration. I don't know. Um, yeah, Paul, are you aware of specific education? That's a great question, Paul. No, so there are no specific education requirements for higher education chaplains at this time, which was another part of like a little bit of shock for me, to be honest, because I'm like, hey, we all need to be on the same page about what it is that we're doing, same standards. Again, never thought I would say that in my life about like standards and process, but no, we do. And so I know the association is called Axel, the association for, and it's spelled like Axel, uh, or no, Ax. Let me just, I'll put it in the chat. But it's the Association for Higher Education Chaplains. They have a conference, they meet every year. They are trying to come up um, with educational requirements. What I met from my colleagues and other institutions is most of them have not had CPE training. And when I asked them, um, like why, for some reason, life things, there was most of them academy driven, right? So most of them have their PhDs, most of them do not have CPE, but 98% of them wish that they had. And so for those who have CPE or clinical training, I think again, you just provide more value as a clinician on the team. And it's like, I think it's better to see system dynamics to be able to have assessments and interventions that are very clean and legible, especially when we're talking to interdisciplinary, excuse me, care for the student, right? When we're talking to a therapist, or, and I also think it provides in a institution of higher education, especially one like Stanford, it adds to legitimacy for something that might be considered woo woo. Especially, Stanford's one of those schools where even it's comparable schools on the East Coast, like MIT, those students have more humanities classes requirements that are in the sciences than Stanford students. So when we look at like CS, which is a big major, right? Computer science, those folks that are in STEM fields, and that's really where I focused on, like those folks that are in STEM fields aren't being encouraged to be in conversation with humanities at a rate that's significantly higher than its sister institutions. So, Harvard, Princeton, MIT, Yale, all of those students have more humanities classes in STEM fields than Stanford students. And so when we think about technology being developed, void engagement with the humanities, I think that's a problem. And even like history and like people are not data, you know. And you see the result of that kind of thinking, I think, very much in what's going on politically today, which is very much in many ways a product of, I hate to say it, but it is a product of elite schools, and in particular Stanford with tech. I mean, it's just true. But yes, I hope this was like legible and accessible. And I know it's 9:43, so I would love to take questions. I think higher education chaplaincy is a field that's still developing. I just hope it can stay around long enough to actually be developed. It's been around since the 50s, but I think, but it was mostly centered in Christendom, like hegemony. I'm so sorry, y'all. Christian's a hot mess, but yes, Shannon.
Yeah, could you speak? I know a little bit about moral injury from like more medical systems.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious how that manifests or what that looks like in higher education or even in the adolescent population.
Oh, thank you, Shannon. That was my research was around. Um, yeah, we don't fully yet know. So I'm slightly unsatisfied, but still in deep pursuit. what from the data I was gathering in the interviews, I did a mixed qual quant, like began a mixed qual quant study. I still have the IRB. I have like 18 more years to finish it. but and it got disrupted because of Israel Palestine stuff. The students were just like, they just stopped taking surveys across campus. They were done. But what I'm seeing is for students that are entering into, and again, I focused on STEM. So I just want to name, like, there's a limitation here on my end, but some of them were asking questions of what part of my beliefs or values do I have to give up in the pursuit of innovation?
Oh, wow.
So like if they wanted to be a part of like this particular advancement in technology, which they were just like happily just nerdily really excited about, but they know that the culture doesn't necessarily, the moral ethical culture doesn't necessarily match up with their own, but that's the only way to get into the door. There were already undergraduate students negotiating what part of themselves are they willing to compromise in order to have the ability to just the love of the pursuit of innovation. That's a big one.
Thank you. I was trying, couldn't, in my mind, I kept drinking. How does that manifest? So thank you very much.
Yes, yes. Augusta.
That was really powerful what you just offered. The whole thing was interesting, but that response to Shannon and just like the rounds of things that one goes through and the parts of themselves that they give up in order, like, you know. So it's a little bit of my system that's like still sitting with that. But yeah. So this question is outside of higher ed chaplaincy, but it's in a lot of what I heard you talking about. And I listened to watch a recording of you from somewhere else. And I was like, so anyway, this has been percolating for me a lot and it just showed up now. So I'm going to bring it and you can take it or leave it.
All right.
Feel free to pass. I have a lot of heaviness and part of why I'm beginning to explore chaplaincy. So I am trained, anyway, not to center myself. As someone interested in moral injury and in care, emotional care, spiritual care, and we see where we are today in various, like, innumerable facets, and the impact of just 3 years of ChatGPT being public, and that's like a blink of an eye. It's such a short period of time and so much fallout already. How does a person, so what I'm struggling with is in my service, how to show up for this, right? Because I have lovely friends who are doing great work in the world, well educated, relying on AI.
Yeah.
And I not using AI, it's like fine, I can choose not to use AI, but like that's not gonna solve a problem.
Yeah.
And so I just see down the road the fallout from decrease of jobs, increase in financial instability, increase in the number of people who are unhoused, increase in opioid epidemics and other substance use, and more stealing and more buckling down from the administration and violence. And I hear you, I get hot just naming it. And so I know you don't have any answers, but I don't even know who to have the conversation with. So thank you for hearing the question. I really appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for asking it. I think you said a quiet part out loud just now. It is one of the main reasons why moral injury in tech, it haunts me. When I was putting the pieces of the puzzle together to just try to begin to pursue it, it haunted me because of a lot of the things that she named. And so I will say that here I'm looking up notes specifically. So I was engaging. That is what I'm in conversation with, like, constantly, low key. So I think a huge, where is it? I think a huge part of it is, one, I think one of the gifts that millennials and up in terms of generations can give is, like, we know how to relate to people. Like, we know how to talk to people. We grew up before, we're not digital natives. So engage, like, teaching people, how our young folks, like, that it's okay to talk, it's okay to disagree, like, because they've never seen a government uh they've never seen a bipartisan government, if you think about it. And I think this is something that y'all as Buddhists in particular can be really amazing for everybody else at, and it's that your ability to be present, because it's moving so fast. I will follow up and send Vanessa the notes, because I can't quite find it right now, and I want to get to everybody else. But there are ways in which, yeah, there are ways in which to use AI and how not to use AI and how to watch out for AI that are going to be very needed.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Augusta. Barb.
Hi, just some comments and maybe a question also. Thank you. I actually teach math at a community college, and I also have an interdisciplinary degree in world religions.
Oh, nice.
How do we bridge those? How am I figuring out how to bridge those? And what's coming up recently is the technology piece that you're speaking of. And then also, what did you say? What part of themselves do they have to compromise? I mean, that's like, whoa, because it's life changing. I mean, and they're at a point in their life where it's, it's life changing. Yeah. So maybe my questions are, because I'm at a community college, I don't think there's any quote spiritual care in the sense, named that per se. There's a women's resource center, there's a men's resource center, and there's an LBQ resource center. But other than that, there aren't any. And there is counseling, but the counselors are overloaded, definitely overloaded. Too many, and they keep cutting them back. The college is really running now on a sorry, I'm going too long maybe, but anyway, is on a model it's money. It's all money. And I ought to say this. Oh, can I say? I'm going to sound, no, I'll wait and say something in a moment, maybe. I'm hesitant. But no, it's okay. The president of the college is a Black woman.
Yeah.
And that's sad. And she keeps picking money over the students. I'm sorry, I'm just sharing. I'm being vulnerable.
Yeah, no, that's fair. No, I mean, I feel like
it's hard. And she's probably in her early 50s.
Yeah,
I'd say.
capitalism is a system, internalized white supremacy is real, and like I can imagine. I guess I'm talking with Buddhists. I can say it. I can guess the compassion that comes out, right? Like the compassion that comes out for me, for her, when I hear you say that, is like, oh my gosh, what parts of herself is she giving up in order to preserve and survive, given just what it means to be a Black woman in the world? What is she doing as self-preservation that she might not even be aware of, but it's literally her epigenetic makeup saying, especially right now with what's going on, African Americans are just like, we know, like, obviously other immigrants aside from Latino immigrants are like, we're next. African Americans are like when will it happen? It's not an if. It's like when it's never not happened. Right. So like, when will it happen? And like, what will that look like? And how much capital can we gain before we lose it again? Right. Because let's see, my parents were born in the 50s. So they're both born without the right to vote. Right. So like, it's just been a generation of like African Americans being able to even gain certain equality or income, or so I can see compassionate. That's where she's coming from. And I also see you on the ground, Barb, being like, but what about these students? And what about like education and the system of education? And I think, end stage capitalism is nasty.
It's nasty.
Okay.
Yeah. It's nasty. Yeah. Yeah. And thank you for that perspective, because that helps me shift a little to have compassion for her, because it feels, yeah, I haven't experienced that. And as I'm listening to you, I'm feeling some compassion for her. Say a little, and I know time, like, say a little bit more.
I'm gonna get to you regardless, so I got you. I got you. Okay, I'll say just one more thing, and then I want to make sure I get to.
Please.
Okay. And it also help put in perspective. Black people, period, make up on this continent 1% of all PhDs. Globally, 2% of PhDs.
Got it.
So if you look, and it might seem because America is really great at like, oh, Black people are everywhere, and it's not necessarily the case. Like, we're really good at certain, right? And so it's a small amount, and the number one PhD degree that is given to African Americans, like not all Black people, African Americans, is like coming out of graduate schools of education. Interestingly enough, so to put it, she's used to being like a 1% and everything. She's used to being the only person in the room all the time, and which is inherently traumatic. I mean, I see most of us as women, and I know Paul well enough to know that like he knows what it's like to be only in his own way. So like, if you're always the only person in the room, that's going to do something over time. Okay, Setka, am I saying your name right?
Thank you.
Yes.
Sveta.
Sveta. Okay, thank you for correcting me.
Hi, Annanda.
Hi.
Everybody. Well, I just, first of all, thank you so much. I'm resonating right now. It was so beautiful. Like many things you talked about, I feel goosebumps. And as I guess I'll just share, I'm a mother of a 17-year-old, so he's going to college next year, and a 13-year-old, and I'm raising them here in the Bay Area, and I'm also finishing my chaplaincy residency year. So yeah. Yeah, so sitting a little bit with right now with what you said about moral injury and thinking like they're not even aware what they're going into. They're not even aware. So this is, feeling tenderness. And I guess I was listening to you. I don't even know if I have a very clear question, but I was listening and it was interesting. My mind was like, thinking about the differences, right? The clinical, the hospital, and you are meeting with young people, and and also thinking about this from the perspective of a mother. I am noticing. Well, I think I noticed one thing that is missing in higher education chaplain that is not there. You are not working with full families, right? With just, so right. And I'm noticing like how when I'm with my kids, and I don't know, I don't want to say I'm a chaplain, but certainly my what is happening for me, my training is influencing how we are all together here at home. And it's kind of, it's so, and I can imagine like you are meeting with these people, young people, and you're talking to them, and you don't see the families, but they bring their families with them, right?
Yes.
And,
yes.
So this is kind of what I'm sitting with, what I'm feeling right now, and kind of how interesting it is. Well, as a hospital chaplain, I sometimes get to see bigger picture, and everybody is there, and we're all together, and this is wonderful when it happens, and when you're meeting with with them there in school, it's different. Their families maybe like on the other side of the ocean, right?
Yeah, totally.
So wanted to say that, and I guess no question, just that comment that is prominent for me.
Well, thank you. And what stood out for me with what you just shared is they bring their families with them, and that is so true. That is so true.
How
Almost
can,
every single student like would
how
talk
can they
about
not? How can they not, right? It's just,
a tool that I would use commonly with them is their emotional genogram.
mm,
That was a really helpful tool for students that were really engaged with their family. So their genogram, and then bringing out like, okay, so your mom, like what was the emotions that your mom had, or was there depression, was there anxiety in a particular time of life? Your dad or your, other parent, was there depression, was there anxiety? Also, was faith big for them? Or do they have a particular practice, so they can begin to see either some of the perspectives that they've inherited, or have a better understanding of their family system dynamics that they're bringing with them, because they do. Those kids, they think about their parents, what their parents will think, what their parents will say, how to be in community with them all the time. They love their parents all the time. That was, I think, no, it's almost kind of emotional saying. That was one of the most interesting phenomena looking back, and it is how concerned they were that how them going into adulthood and how they're changing and becoming more and more their own person, not wanting who they become, not wanting it to be a barrier of relationality, a relationship or love with their parents and their families, and so much fear if they differed or how they differed that it would be.
thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody. I'm sorry I had to step away. You probably noticed that I had to step away. Ananda knows that I had a very difficult double booking today. So I'm working with that. But this is the end of our hour. And I'm wondering if, usually what we do for the next half an hour is sort of continue with a conversation or a Q&A with past and present Sati students. And then I'm noticing with great delight that we have future Sati students here in the room too, which is wonderful, absolutely wonderful. So, I did, miss the question and answers now. And so I don't really have a sense of, is there more? Would you like to continue for a little while, or do you feel complete? So I wonder if anyone can give me a sense of, if there's still things you might like to talk about or ask. And yeah, so Gwen.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize my video was off this whole time. Apologies. Um,
Right.
that's kind of shameful for a Zen Buddhist not to, not to be present visually. Anyway, I would love to stay on if you have a few minutes. I wanted to wait and make sure that if there were people who weren't Sati program students that I didn't take some time from them. So I'd be very happy if other people are, if you're open, Ananda, to staying for.
Very much so. Very much so.
Sure. Well, let's go ahead with that then. I also see we have a couple of folks from the Anakampa program here as well as Paul, our friend and very regular friend at our Buddhist Chaplaincy speaker series, Paul Fulmer as well. So, I feel like we're an intimate, friendly group here. So, yes, if if you'd like to continue, normally we'd run until 10:30 Pacific time. So, I'll just keep the recording running. And off you go. And so I'll come back in about 25 minutes. Okay.
Thank you, Vanessa. Yes, Gwen.
Well, having jumped in and said I'd love to continue, I don't know that I have a single well-formulated question. I've got
That's
many
all right.
thoughts. This has really been, really rich. I will start by sharing just something I thought that you'd find amusing and relates to your comment about, the maturational stage that's common for the undergraduate people that you work with. And that is that my graduate advisor once described graduate school as extended neoteny. So the neoteny being, as you probably may, as some of us may know, neoteny meaning like extended childhood, because humans, in contrast with, other non-human animals or non-mammals in particular, I mean, we have a very, we were children for a long time. And he said, so now I'm thinking, not only you could probably make the same case for undergraduates, but people in higher education who are undergoing extended, because like you said, Reverend, they're not out in the world working. And I certainly fell into that category, so I'm not judging anyone. But then on top of that, you have the AI piece and technology. And I just to share something quickly. I just finished mentoring a student in a computer science undergraduate working on a thesis, and want to kind of zero in on a question here. The subject of the thesis was digitizing an educational Zen Buddhist board game. And I felt this conflict, a bit of this conflict in that, and I had to get permission from the monks in our Sangha too, because, here you have real life teachers and I think you'll see where this question is going. You look with teachers in the classroom, they bring this relationality, as do real life chaplains, as do real life clinicians and so forth. And now you have the advent of, let's say, an avatar monk coming on, and you have, maybe a platform that the intention is, support people's spiritual transformation and whatever you want to think of that tool. But the idea behind the game is basically you enter, kind of wheel of training. It could be a mountain of training or whatever. And, you encounter different, sort of real life situations and deal with ethics and meditation, whatever. So it's sort of tracking spiritual. And the question is, really for the student working on this, I noticed, like you said, she really was completely uninterested in engaging with any of that content. And I certainly did, I'm sounding judgmental here, I certainly did appreciate that she had a focus. She needed to complete the thesis. But the surprise thing, she was highly interdisciplinary when she came to me. But there was something in the way she kind of tried to navigate this. It was almost like a fear of, I think it's part of this maturational stage. She wanted to get the thing done, and what seemed for her maybe getting in the way of it was this broader context. And so I was trying to kind of scaffold her a little bit to say, you don't have to deal with all those issues, but the essence of this question is about this multidisciplinary aspect that you're pointing to. I'm sorry, it's a bit all over the place, but you have people in STEM fields, and yes, as you said, it's really shaping our society. And the question is kind of, do you have any insights, any feelings from your experience about how to foster more appreciation for true interdisciplinary work in, with the students that you're working with? Particularly, we'll focus on the STEM students. The last thing I'll mention is, many years ago, I read E.O. Wilson's Consilience. Do you know that book? It's an old book, and actually I wasn't as moved by it when I reread it recently. But the whole point, this is written back, I think, in the 80s, was, we think of these two paradigms, the science, and then the sort of art and religion. These different ways of understanding the world. And the whole point of Consilience was there's no real division. They are inherently, there are two ways. And I think this is maybe easier for people to relate to these days, because there are different models of knowledge building, not just the sort of objective, whatever positivist kind of old 20th century, but also this experiential embodied, and people are kind of ready to hear that message. But I'm just, do you understand kind of what I'm getting at is, I don't know if that pings something for you and your experience working with, these young undergraduates. They're bright, they're intellectual, they've got these, but then if I could put it in Buddhist terms, I don't like this division personally, but there's the head and the heart. So that's a kind of crude way of putting it. You know, are there ways that you have approached this with people who come to you, with maybe they come to you specifically, I've got a career, you know, I'm worried about my career, and what you get in the sense is, oh, it's what you were saying, you know, that they're worried really about their career, but there's also a sense that they're worried about losing something, you know, in the heart, giving up something, as you said. So sorry that was so long, but that's kind of, yeah, that sense of my question, I think.
No, thank you. I'm writing. Okay. All right. So the word you used earlier,
Oh, neoteny, Neote. I'm sorry, I'll share that.
No, you're fine. Thank you for that. I just want to say I nodded my head like yes, but you explained it, so thank you, because I did not know. I just want to like name that. One. Two, the students, I think the interdisciplinary factor is so important. And I think it's important for us as like millennials and up to be reminded that we're dealing with, you know, folks who are digital natives. We start from analog, they start from digital. So our touch points we are worlds apart in a way. And I think one of the biggest gifts that all of us who are millennial and up, who grew up analog and up first, and have seen the evolution of technology in ways that they haven't. I asked, my dad adopted, really, this is quick to answer your question. I have a younger sister, just graduated high school. My dad adopted my stepsister. I don't even talk to her that much. She does most of the talking via text, which is weird, even if we're at the dinner table. So it's like a whole other and so I think that we have to remember that like there actually is a shift happening in human relationship, right? Like the big rage right now with middle schoolers is having like an AI boyfriend or girlfriend, and there are whole AI apps out there to facilitate that, which is wild. So their first experience with romantic relationship is not with a human. We're in a whole different, we are in a different era. And that impact on human relationality is real. And so I think with your student, to get right to the point, because I also want to be able to address Shannon, but to get right to the point, one is like, you know, why this game and what does this game like help relationally? So I think the gift of all spiritual and religious traditions is like human to human relationship. Like they're still analog, and it doesn't negate technology. Like Islam has a really massive tradition that I didn't even realize of science in Muslim understanding. I'm not as familiar with Buddhism in that regard, nor am I as in Christianity is a little rough, but I think getting back to like how are we in relationship with one another, and now we have a third person in that room, and the third person in the room is like, it's like human to human relationship, and now it's really like human to AI relationship. That's what's happening. And then last, I'll say David Presti is a name. He's a professor at UC Berkeley, a great guy. He's a neuroscientist, he's a physicist, and I think he has at least two, maybe three PhDs. But he has a great work. I can't think of it now, but it's one of those things that I will circle back with Vanessa to send to y'all. David Presti is really good. He came to speak at the Berkeley program that I just finished in the fall on the limits of Western science. So I think also what we're running against, what you're talking about, is Western science. The reason why it's like, oh my gosh, the conscious mind, because it was not designed to deal with consciousness. Which is what we see like issues with like MDMA and those kind of trials. And so I think it's also important for STEM students to know, and for us to know as well, especially in the Western world, the limits of science in the Western world, how it developed, the framework of science and how it developed, and like where its edges are. Because it actually has edges, and he describes those edges very well. like very well, like the evolution of scientific thought in the Western world, how it got to what it got to, and how it can only contain but so much because of its framework and design. And he doesn't argue it's a bad thing. It's just, it is what it is. And so I think that knowledge is super important. But his name is David Presti. I'll put it in the chat. No, sorry, Presti. Yeah, he's great. He's great. Shannon, I hope that was helpful, Glenn.
Well, now my mind's just, not sure I remember my original question.
Sorry.
No, this is really, it's fascinating. It's so huge. And so one question, just a simple one, is what do most of these people who are chaplains have a PhD in?
Oh, it varies. So in my context at Stanford, Amina, the Muslim chaplain, she has her PhD in chemical engineering. So like she's great to have these, like, an amazing conversation partner for me my entire fellowship. Because she got it. Like she got the engineering mind, but she is very much, she calls herself an imama, and people refer to her as imama, right? So really awesome. And she follows more of the Sufi tradition, so more of the mystical tradition out of Islam. Very, very wonderful. And then most everybody, let's see, Rev Sis, my mentor, her PhD is in see, Black feminist, what is it? Afrofuturism. So she did like Enjoy. So she did like Comic-Con and Afrofuturism and Black feminist. So really, if Stanford is interesting in that, Yale doesn't quite have this. I don't think Harvard has this, but Stanford is really interesting in their separation. And so the Office of Religious and Spiritual Life is separate than the Department of the Religion. So all these folks with PhDs actually can't teach in the fields of what their PhDs are, which is it's not as, it's kind of weird, to be honest. Like compared to their East Coast schools, it's kind of weird. And then both Tiffany and the other two chaplains that had PhDs, their PhDs were in like theology.
Yeah. I was curious about that. Listening to this and, resonating very much with Augusta, but as you're talking, so I'm a clinical social worker. I worked in a hospital mostly a psychiatric hospital for the medical school for quite a while, but I never thought of it this way. But part of why I left was because it was always about the money and trying to, there was that I can't do this anymore. And because I would have to couch everything in the terms of money, in order, or how we can make more money to try to get some kind of quality of care.
Right.
So part of it was just realizing that I was able to walk away, and because it's like I just can't do that. But I had never put that into perspective before. That's part of what that moral injury that so many people are experiencing now. And so then I relate that just to capitalism. It's not that it's just capitalism. And we talk, as everybody's talking, it's going, wow, this is just so big and deep and across so many things. And we're all caught in this net. You have to make money and in this country, but how do you do it? And then hearing this about these, and I see it just in my community where it doesn't matter how old people are. There's just people who are adolescent and have never learned. I mean, there's, I just think, I haven't been on the news for a couple of months, but just all the anger and, the adolescent, all the adolescent adults, all the way up to 80 more, right? That they don't know how to relate, except through that field of, or veil of I, me, mine. It's like, it's so, I always think it's like junior high school. It's what it feels like sometimes when I was in junior school. So I'm 70. So this is like, I'm looking at all this and going, whoa, You know, there's a part of me that goes, I'm so glad I'm at the shorter end of this.
Yeah.
It's getting really hard to adapt. I mean, of course, we were talking yesterday about, how we had party lines on our phones. Some friends and I, when we were kids, and you're going, look where we are now. It's just, and can't keep up. But also, my biggest concern is the heart of the country and the heart of people and these values, and having to make those kind of decisions, because I was able to make that decision. I just chose to. I walked away from a nice chunk of change and benefits, but it was like, I can't do this. Yeah. So thank you. It's been very informative, and it kind of breaks my heart in some ways, but we'll see what happens. Thank you.
No, thank you, Shannon. Thank you. Yeah, I think that the technology piece, to your point, it really is separating generations, making it harder to communicate. And I'm seeing that here at the church deeply. I mean, we just save stuff on the Google Drive, and we have so many of our seniors and our elders that are like, how do I access this? And then feeling left behind from this community that they helped stewarded. Like, we would not be here were it not for them.
Right. Well, and then we can't ever catch up.
Right. It's
every day so much that you just, it's like, it makes me wish that I had some kids in my neighborhood so I could call them to help me out.
Yeah. I mean, not to be capitalist, but I mean, we're in it. We're just fish swimming in the water. But the people who come up with ways to help aging Americans, or just people, but specifically in America, because we have no breaks compared to the rest of the world. Most of the rest of the world, who are able to help train or make it accessible, those people will be new billionaires, and it will actually be providing a service. Yes, Barb.
Yeah. So as I listen to you, what you just said, the millenniums are actually a bridge. You're a bridge, and I'm older, but you're a bridge between technology and us folks not raised with technology. There's a bridge there. So there's awareness. So as I'm listening to you today, there's an awareness that's opening for me. And two questions I have: how to bring chaplaincy into the community college, because it's not Stanford. And the other question is, when you say I was more clinical than I realized, would you say a little more about that? If you'd be so kind, because I wasn't sure what you meant by that. I wanted to hear your take on that. So if you would, thank you.
Well, I'm excited for where you are, Barb, because I feel like as you're describing your community college, I actually think higher education chaplaincy could have a renaissance on community college campuses, because they're not massive institutions like Stanford. And because of that, one, inherently community. Two, not nearly on the administration's eye in the same way. So you could have like these hush harbors of renaissance that I think, fair, but I think there's a great possibility there. Hush harbors are, like African American term of like kind of hidden in plain sight kind of places that you could do like the good work. And
but the trick is how to juggle that and bring it. Actually, I'd have to bring it forward to the college.
Yeah, you'd have to organize.
It's not there.
Yeah,
pardon me?
You'd totally have to organize. Like, if I was in your shoes, I would be just like going around and just already kind of low key doing it, beginning to like lay the foundation work and just do it just naturally, and then it's kind of there. And then
I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt you if I may. Well, I teach remotely, so that means that I'm on the computer, which is new for me because of the pandemic. So I've learned a hell of a lot in the past 5 years, because I taught for years in the classroom.
Okay.
So, but now I'm on remotely. So it's interesting. Anyway, so I'm not on the campus anymore.
Not on the campus. All right. Those student centers that you named, if anything that I've learned from my time at Stanford, those student services that I just named, like, reach out to them first and build relationship. Build relationship, because once you have rapport and trust, then they're willing to experiment with what you have to offer.
Got it. Got it. Because there's so many more students. So yeah, remote is the word that community college uses. So I meet with them twice a week in the classroom. We're, we're live, which is great because I'd much rather do that than to me, being totally online is hard because then
Yeah.
that relational piece to me is missing.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of this bridge, if you will, between being in the classroom per se versus totally online. So anyway, so back to my other question. What did you mean when you said it's more clinical than you realized, if you would?
That higher education is, like, I am more clinical than I realized. Oh, yes.
Yes, yes. If you would rather pass, that's
No, I
okay.
won't pass, because actually I think it's important. It's actually a huge argument that there's like one point where I was probably a pain in the behind to my colleagues in that office. I was like, for instance, social workers, right? Social workers, everybody knows if you have the designation social work that you have a particular standardized training, right? Everybody knows this for nurses and clinical professions, psychologists, therapists, right? And so I think what is interesting and at times frustrating for chaplaincy is that it's not necessarily that we've had the same standard training. So to me, I realized it became an issue of trying to point out a particular dynamic in the room that they might not see because they haven't had the training, but I don't have the language to share it with them. And they're trying to tell me something about the academy that I can't see because I don't yet have my PhD. I'm not in it yet, right? So I can't see it. And so like we're like ships in the night being frustrated because I'm like, can we not, like, this is a glaring elephant in the room for me and it's not for them. I think a way to mediate that eventually came is Stanford hired 2 other chaplains from a different donor. And they didn't go through the CPE, well, one now is in the CPE program, but they didn't go through the CPE program like at Stanford in particular, but they already had both of them at least had like 2 units of CPE. And so I was just like, thanks be to God, because they can see these dynamics that I can see. And then I finally had folks to consult with on how to like assess and intervene. And so it was like there's like a clinical and a non-clinical team that was actually, I think, more helpful than like one clinician and like no clinicians, but who are also chaplains. And so I think that's where I surprised myself of like, oh, I'm more clinical than I think, because my bias is I entered into chaplaincy through a clinical setting. And so, but I also saw the ways in which it could help in terms of de-escalate, especially my last 2 years on campus because of Israel Gaza and everything. I was like, oh, this clinical training is really helpful to like name, de-escalate, bring back down and build relationship across. And so I wound up my last year doing a lot of group work, interpersonal relationship work with the deans, and the staff, because Muslim dean had some feelings what was going on in Muslim students on campus, very understandable. Jewish dean was having some feelings what's going on campus. The rest are Christian deans, and get us Christians in a room, we're bound to mess something up with our hegemony, right? So it was like how to hold that. And we made it a practice to do it, like I think every other month. And it was good. It helped to de-escalate, it helped to build across relationship, but that was from my clinical training.
Got it. And that also would have trickled down too. Because if you're meeting with the deans, that trickles down to, you know what I mean, the folks that
Yeah.
they're in touch with, and then that trickles down, you know what I mean? So again, I'm back to students, but you know what I mean? It affects everybody.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. And I really think
yeah.
group is important. I know we're close to close, but I will say the thing about moral injury that I've learned the most thus far, and I really do intend to get my PhD in this. Probably won't be in the US, but I'm planning to do it. Is the repair portion is so necessary, but a huge part of moral repair is being witnessed by and in community, non-judgmentally witnessed and believed, and then having some sort of like community bonding or ritual or acknowledgement of the pain. And I think if we can begin to do that, which I think you all as Buddhists have such rich traditions in this respect, it can be it's invaluable and helps the healing, because moral injury at its worst is a comorbidity with PTSD and will look like it, even though it's not it. So you can treat somebody with PTSD and they no longer qualify on the DSM-5 for symptoms. But if they had the comorbidity with moral injury and it shows up, it will look like they continue to have PTSD because the moral injury was not addressed. And so, and that was discovered in the 80s with US Army psychologists.
It's hard to tease those apart.
It can be, for sure, but it's also realizing that right, psychology is like you know, our emotions and and what it leads to behaviorally, right? Our behaviors and how it impacts us emotionally. I kind of agree with that. Right. And so I always say, like, what's the difference between chaplains and therapists? Therapists deal with your behavior, right? Your emotions as it relates to behavior, and chaplains deal with your beliefs and values as it relates to how you show up, not necessarily behavior, because we're not trained as strong in that. But it just goes to show that there is a distinct, and I think, and is argued by many scholars of moral injury, because it is a growing field, that and then I'll be quiet because it's 10:30, that that religion, but really spiritual traditions, but the spirituality of religious traditions, I think, qualifies for this, are uniquely poised to address moral injury, because it's not just trauma, it's also just the phenomena of what it means to be human and suffering, right? It just, like, growing and encountering things that have you question yourself and kind of break your worldview open, or, you know, having to make decisions that break your heart. That's just a part of the human experience also. So some of it is very unique to acute trauma, and some of it is just being human. And all of our, you know, spiritual systems are designed to address that. So that's why I think chaplaincy has a very strong place in that field.
You said you're going to do your PhD in moral injury, but not in the US. You have spots in mind?
Yes, I'm looking at the UK and Ireland, and just to yeah, give it a gander, because I don't know how far they let me go here, given what's going on. Yeah, but I could possibly do those things remote in some of the schools over there, not all. So
Well, good luck with that, Annanda. May that path open for you, you know, however it needs to. Thank you so much for coming this morning. I am just so delighted to see you. I'm personally delighted to reconnect with you, and I'm delighted to introduce you to our community here and to see you guys really hit it off. So I'm always so inspired by you and your energy and everything that you do. So thank you so much for sharing that with us today. And
thank you, Vanessa. You're amazing. You're amazing. And the Sati Center, I'm so glad that you are here. And thank you. I do not take it lightly, this invitation. And you're pretty much a powerhouse yourself. So, so I deeply appreciate you and you all for your time today.
Thank you. Come again. Come again.
Yes, I will.
You're very welcome. Okay. All right, everybody. We'll have a lovely weekend.
Thank you very much.
Again, soon we will recommence our speaker series after the summer. So in September, October, there'll be more.
Thank you.
Okay. See you all then.
Thank you, Annanda.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.